Hello! This fifth video continues from the previous video on abstract reference by presenting some of the usage situations that affect the way abstract reference is expressed in English. But first, let's review the usage patterns for articles and nouns reference that we have discussed so far. The simplified framework we presented in the previous video suggests one-to-one mapping between meaning and form for the three kinds of noun reference that influence articles' usage in English. Specific reference takes the in front of the noun, concrete reference takes a in front of the noun when it is singular, and abstract reference takes zero in front of the plural form of the noun when it is countable. In fact, the one-to-one mapping holds up pretty well for specific and for concrete reference, and holds up for much of abstract reference. However, for abstract reference, speakers can also choose other forms of the article depending on speaker intention and on the situation. Abstract reference shows up a lot in academic writing when speakers, as writers, want to make empirically based truth claims. So we should look in detail at what would motivate speaker choice in these other article usage patterns that also make abstract reference. As we have said, zero plus plural form of the noun can be regarded as the default article usage pattern for abstract reference. The truth claim, Hondas are good cars, should be based on empirical facts about the performance characteristics of Honda automobiles. However, from these made-up examples, one can see that other articles usage patterns are also possible for abstract reference. Look at sentences 1 to 3. Again, we have said that sentence number 1 should be regarded as default and is no doubt the most frequent form for abstract reference. So, what would motivate speakers to choose the other two patterns for abstract reference? For sentence number 2, we want to suggest that the use of the for abstract reference is motivated by speaker intention to make a stronger truth claim, stronger than that indicated by default zero plus plural pattern. Here we can imagine that the Honda is not only referring to all Hondas, but is referring to some super abstract, Platonic Honda that is the idealization of all possible Hondas across space and time. This is a higher level of abstraction than default zero plus plural. On the other hand, for sentence number 3, we want to suggest that the use of a for abstract reference is motivated by speaker intention to make a weaker truth claim, weaker than that indicated by default zero plus plural pattern. Here we can imagine that a Honda may not actually be referring to all possible Hondas, but is merely referring to a sufficient number of Hondas that makes it just possible for the claim to be generally true. This is a lower level of abstraction than default zero plus plural. For example, in sentence number 4, one can see that the claim about Hondas is weaker than the claim about Toyotas. So, what would motivate a speaker to want to make a stronger versus a weaker abstract claim? That is, choose abstract the plus noun versus the default zero plus plural. A straightforward way to think about the choice of abstract the to make stronger truth claims rather than choosing the default zero plus plural is to imagine that speakers are appealing to expert knowledge. This pattern shows up frequently in academic discourse, where writers have a solid empirical basis for claims and where writers try to make the strongest truthful claims that the data will support. Look at sentences 5, 6, and 7. Of course, the use of default zero plus plural article would be fine in all these sentences. That is, mice are excellent research animals, number 5. Wheelchairs have improved the lives of the handicapped, number 6. And elephants are extinct in North Africa, number 7. However, the use of abstract the here gives the sentences an academic tone, which is a reflection of the fact that the use of abstract the carries the connotation of stronger truth claim. On the other hand, what would motivate a speaker to want to make a weaker versus a stronger abstract claim? That is, choose a plus noun versus the default 0 plus plural. A straightforward way to think about the choice of a to make weaker truth claims, rather than choosing the default 0 plus plural, is to imagine that the situation involves some real-world constraint that makes speakers' choice of abstract a in front of the referent closer to the truth. Look at sentences 8 and 9. Of course, the use of default 0 plus plural article would be fine in both the above sentences. That is, doctors are trained to treat burns, number 8. Students may be considered truant after 4 unexcused absences, number 9. However, one can imagine that the use of the weaker abstract a would be motivated in sentence number 8 by the fact that not all doctors are trained to treat burns. Some doctors are specialists, trained to treat cancer. Others are trained to perform brain surgery. This is a real-world constraint that might make a speaker choose the weaker abstract a article pattern in order to be closer to the truth. Similarly, one can imagine that the use of the weaker abstract a in sentence number 9 could be motivated by the fact that a student can have 4 unexcused absences but still not necessarily be charged with being truant. There could be mitigating circumstances. Note the use of may in sentence number 9 already indicates weaker claim. Or perhaps truancy is rare at this school, making the singular abstract form a student sound truer than the plural abstract form students, which might sound too strong for this situation. Before we conclude this video, let's look at 2 more examples of abstract a, motivated not so much by strength of claim constraints, but by other real-world constraints. Look at sentences 10 and 11. Of course, the use of default 0 plus plural article would be fine in sentence number 10, but not for sentence number 11, as we shall see. That is, there is no cure for colds, number 10. However, one can imagine that the use of the weaker abstract a might be motivated in sentence number 10 by the fact that people can only catch 1 cold at a time, or that for most people, the incidence of catching a cold is low, generally no more than once per year. The choice of abstract a here, then, is motivated not so much by truth constraints, but by how speakers conceptualize their experience of the world, which is, nevertheless, from the speaker's perspective, still a real-world constraint. Actually, corpus data shows cure for colds and cure for a cold having the same frequency of usage. Sentence number 11 is interesting because, taken out of context, this sentence is ambiguous between concrete and abstract reference for a Norwegian. It could be the case that the speaker knows that Joan already has a particular Norwegian man in mind. Perhaps his name is Olaf. This is concrete reference, first mentioned, as we have seen. Or it could be the case that Joan simply idealizes Norwegian men and wants to marry one someday. This is abstract reference, but the default pattern, 0 plus plural for abstract reference, cannot apply here because of real-world constraint. There's a cultural constraint against people having more than one marriage partner at a time. Okay. Our presentation about article usage in English in these videos has suggested a simplified framework in which there is a one-to-one mapping between meaning and form for the 3 kinds of reference in English. That is, specific reference takes the in front of the noun, Concrete reference takes a in front of the noun when the noun is singular, and abstract reference takes zero in front of the noun but plural ending on the noun itself when the noun is countable. In this video, we have focused in some detail on abstract reference, looking at the variation that shows up in actual usage situations. We find that our default pattern for abstract reference, zero plus plural, holds up in most cases, but that abstract the can also be used when the speaker wants to make a stronger, more abstract, or expert knowledge truth claim. We also find that abstract can be used when the speaker wants to make a weaker, less abstract, more constrained truth claim. This concludes our explanation about some of the variations in usage patterns for abstract reference in English. A subsequent video is available to let you test your knowledge about these abstract reference variations.